How I got married to my first wife, not knowing she was a ghost. I don't usually write things like this, and honestly, even as I type these words, part of me wonders if I should just keep it buried. I've carried this story for years, carrying it like a stone in my chest, and the weight of it hasn't gotten any lighter with time. But lately, the nights have been restless again, and I've been waking up with that familiar coldness beside me. The same coldness I thought I left behind when I ran from her. Maybe this is just my way of letting it out before it eats me alive. Maybe I just need to know that I'm not insane, that somebody out there might believe me. So here it is, the story of how I married my first wife without realizing, until it was too late, that she wasn't alive. It began like something out of a love story, the kind of thing you'd see in a movie or read in a cheap paperback novel. I was 26 back then, living in a small apartment just outside of Boston, working long hours at a bland accounting job. My life was painfully ordinary. Wake up at 6:30, ride the crowded train downtown, stare at spreadsheets until my vision blurred, come home to a microwave dinner and Netflix until I fell asleep. I had gone through a breakup not long before, and my friends were all moving on with their lives, marriages, kids, new jobs, while I was stuck in this rut, convinced that excitement had somehow passed me by. I think that's why I was so vulnerable, so quick to throw myself into what happened. Loneliness does dangerous things to your judgment. I first met Claire on a rainy Thursday evening. I ducked into this little corner cafe near my apartment to escape a sudden downpour. The place was quiet, just a few students with laptops, the hiss of the espresso machine, the low hum of indie music. And then I saw her. She was sitting alone at a corner table, a porcelain teacup in her hands, staring out the window as if she were waiting for something or someone. I don't know what made me approach her, but the moment her eyes lifted and met mine, it felt like being pulled into a current I couldn't fight. Her eyes were the kind of blue that stops you in your tracks, and she smiled in this gentle, almost knowing way, as if we weren't strangers at all, but two people finally meeting again after a long absence. I sat down and somehow we just talked. Hours slipped away as if they were minutes. The rain outside blurred the windows, the cafe slowly emptied, and I didn't even notice because she held my full attention. Her voice was soft but steady, like she'd rehearsed each word in her head before speaking. She told me she had recently moved back into town after being away for a long time, though when I asked where she had been, she just smiled faintly and said, "Someplace quiet." I didn't press. It didn't matter. What mattered was how she made me feel seen, understood, important. That night, as the barista stacked chairs onto tables and gave us impatient looks, Claire scribbled her number onto a napkin and slid it across to me. "I'll see you again soon," she whispered. And by the time I walked back to my apartment through puddles and mist, my phone buzzed with a text from her. "I can't wait to see you again." Looking back, there were signs I should have noticed, signs that screamed at me to stop. She never agreed to meet during the daytime, always insisting on evening walks or late dinners. She never touched her food, just sipped tea or wine while I ate, saying she wasn't hungry. Her hands were always cold, so cold that even when I tried to joke about it, she would just smile sadly and say, "That's how I've always been." And then there were the little things she seemed to know about me. Details I hadn't told her, like the name of my childhood dog or the way I hated elevators. At the time, I thought it was just intuition, some kind of romantic magic. I didn't realize it was something else entirely. But when you're lonely and starved for connection, you don't question the good things. You don't stop to ask why someone seems too perfect, or why the hairs on the back of your neck rise when they walk into the room. You tell yourself it's butterflies, that it's fate that you finally found what you were waiting for. That's what I told myself with Claire. And so I ignored every flicker of unease, every shiver of cold air when she leaned close, every strange feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was something unnatural about the way she had appeared in my life. I ignored it all because love, or what I thought was love, felt too good to let go. And that was how it began, the relationship that would unravel into a horror I could never escape, the love story that turned into a nightmare I'll never wake from. The weeks after that first night blurred together into something I can only describe as enchantment. Every evening after work, I found myself rushing through the train station, my heart pounding as I checked my phone for her messages. Claire always chose where we met. Never the same cafe twice, never the same street or park. It was like she wanted to keep us moving, never anchored in one place. At first, I thought it was charming, like she was making every meeting feel fresh and new, like a little adventure. But soon it became clear she avoided certain things with a precision that was almost deliberate. I never once saw her in the daylight. If I suggested brunch on a Sunday, she'd say she wasn't feeling well. If I asked about spending a Saturday afternoon together, she'd tell me she had errands, then text me after sundown asking to meet. For a while, I convinced myself it was quirky, maybe even mysterious. But sometimes walking home after midnight, the streets empty, and the wind biting, I felt more unsettled than enchanted. She had this way of looking at me too, like she was memorizing me, like she was afraid I'd disappear if she blinked. It wasn't the kind of gaze that makes you blush, but the kind that makes you shiver, like you're being studied. Still, I drowned those doubts in the rush of infatuation. Every time she reached for my hand, every time her voice whispered my name in that soft, deliberate tone, I felt needed. I told myself that love wasn't supposed to make sense anyway. Love was irrational. And in those first months, she gave me something I hadn't felt in years, the illusion that I mattered more than anyone else in the world. My friends started to notice changes in me. You've been disappearing. One of them joked during happy hour, raising his beer in mock salute. They teased me about my mystery woman. But every time I thought about introducing her, something stopped me. Claire never wanted to meet them. She'd smile when I mentioned it, then tilt her head and say, "I don't like crowds. I just want you to myself for now." It should have been a red flag. In fact, the list of red flags was growing longer by the week. She never talked about her family. She never mentioned work except to say she wasn't doing anything conventional. And whenever I tried to ask deeper questions, her answers slid around mine, vague and slippery as smoke. But desire has a way of silencing logic. The more she pulled away from the world, the more I leaned into her. Maybe that's why, when she whispered one night as we walked along the Charles River, "Do you ever think about forever?" I answered without hesitation, "Yes, with you." Her face lit up in a way I'll never forget, a kind of quiet triumph. That was the first time she mentioned marriage. Not in a rushed way, not with the excitement most women might have. Instead, she said it with calm certainty, as though it was already decided. "We belong together," she told me, squeezing my hand, her cold fingers biting it against my skin. "We don't need anyone else's approval, just ours." A few weeks later, she brought it up again, and this time she suggested something that made my stomach twist. "We should do it privately," she said, her eyes gleaming in the glow of a street lamp. "Not a big wedding, just us away from everyone. Intimate, sacred." At the time, I thought it was romantic. What could be purer than a love so strong it didn't need an audience? I didn't know then that her insistence wasn't about intimacy. It was about secrecy. The night she proposed, we exchanged vows. It wasn't in a church or a courthouse. It was in an old, ivy-covered chapel tucked behind a forgotten cemetery on the edge of town. I remember feeling uneasy when she led me there, her grip tight around my hand as we stepped through the iron gates. The place looked abandoned, wooden pews warped with age, stained glass windows cracked and covered in dust, the faint smell of damp stone and mold lingering in the air. I hesitated, asking her if it was really okay to be there, but she only smiled that same faint knowing smile and said, "This is the right place. You'll see." We stood at the front, just the two of us, with flickering candlelight casting long shadows on the walls. She pulled out 2 rings, simple silver bands that glinted strangely in the dim light, and pressed one into my palm. "Say the words with me," she whispered. Her voice trembled with intensity, and I swear for a moment her eyes looked almost luminous, like they were catching light that wasn't there. I repeated after her words that didn't sound like any marriage vows I'd ever heard before, though my heart was hammering too hard to care. She spoke of eternity of promises, beyond life and death, of binding our souls. I told myself it was just poetic language, that she was being dramatic. I didn't realize until much later that I had been sealing something far darker than a promise of love. When it was over, she kissed me with such desperation that I thought my heart might burst. The candles flickered violently, though there was no draft. The air grew colder around us, sharp enough to make me shiver. And then she whispered against my lips, "Now you are mine. Forever." I thought it was romantic. I thought it was love. But even then, a part of me, some quiet, terrified part I buried quickly, knew that something irreversible had just happened, and that I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. For a while after that night in the chapel, I lived in a haze. It's hard to describe, but everything felt different, like I was walking around in someone else's skin. Claire seemed happier, though, calmer almost. She wore the silver band on her finger, constantly turning it around like it was some sacred relic, her thumb stroking over the metal whenever she thought I wasn't watching. I wore mine too, but with a kind of restless unease. The more I thought about that night, the more unsettled I felt. Who had written those vows? Where had she gotten those rings? Why did that chapel feel like a place time had forgotten? Still, every time those questions surfaced, I'd swallow them down, afraid of what answers might come back if I asked. Our life together didn't look like any marriage I'd ever seen. We didn't move in together. She still refused to meet my friends or let me meet hers, if she even had any. I only ever saw her at night in quiet, empty places where the streetlights seemed too far apart and the shadows pressed in close. Sometimes when I touched her, she felt so cold, I'd instinctively pull my hand back, then laugh it off like it was nothing. Other times, her presence filled me with a heavy drowsiness, like she was draining something out of me without meaning to. And the dreams. God, the dreams were the worst. I'd wake up in the dead of night, drenched in sweat, her face hovering above me in the dark, only to realize she wasn't even there. Or at least, I didn't think she was. The first real crack came one evening when I decided to surprise her. She had given me a vague address, around Beacon Hill, she'd said once, in passing, almost carelessly. I'd brushed it off then, but one Friday night after work, curiosity got the better of me. I wandered those narrow brick-lined streets, scanning names on buzzers, hoping I might stumble across her. It felt like chasing a ghost, and in hindsight, maybe that's exactly what I was doing. I never found her apartment. In fact, no one in the area seemed to know anyone by her name. I must have looked like a lunatic showing strangers her photo on my phone, asking if they recognized her. Some shook their heads politely, others gave me wary looks. But one old woman frowned when she saw the picture. She went pale, muttered something under her breath, and hurried away before I could press further. That was the first time a real chill of fear slid down my spine. When I confronted Claire about it later, she didn't get angry like I expected. She didn't even deny it. She just stared at me for a long time, then said, "You shouldn't have done that." Her voice was soft, but it carried a weight that made my chest tighten. Some things are better left alone. I wanted to argue to demand answers, but the look in her eyes stopped me cold. It wasn't rage I saw there. It was sorrow. Deep, bottomless sorrow. She touched my face gently and whispered, "Don't pull away from me. Please. We're bound now. You'll understand soon." And like a fool, I let it go. I let myself be soothed by her touch, by the trembling vulnerability in her tone, even though the fear inside me was spreading like poison. The second crack was worse. One night after we'd met at her usual spot by the river, she excused herself to use the restroom at a nearby cafe. I waited outside, scrolling absently through my phone until I heard a muffled scream from inside. Rushing in, I found the cafe empty. No barista, no customers, no Claire. Just a cup of tea steaming on a corner table. My blood ran cold. I searched everywhere, the bathroom, the kitchen, even behind the counter, but she was gone. Then just as suddenly she appeared outside waving at me like nothing had happened. "What's wrong?" she asked, tilting her head with that eerie smile. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't even answer. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head, trying to make sense of it. I Googled her name again and again, hoping to find something, anything, to anchor her to reality. But there was nothing. No social media, no work records, no family ties, just emptiness like she had been plucked out of nowhere and dropped into my life. My chest tightened as a thought crept in, one I had been avoiding for months. Maybe she didn't exist. Not in the way I thought she did. The breaking point came a week later. I was walking home when I passed by that same chapel where we'd exchanged vows. Only this time, it wasn't abandoned. Lights flickered inside, and the sound of faint organ music drifted through the cracks in the walls. My curiosity overpowered my fear. I pushed open the heavy doors, and what I saw inside made my knees buckle. At the altar where we had once stood, a small group of people in black robes were gathered chanting words I didn't understand. And in the center of them was a photograph. A photograph of Claire. Only it wasn't recent. It was yellowed, faded, clearly decades old. Her face stared back at me from another lifetime, beneath a caption etched in black ink. "In loving memory, Claire Whitmore, 1973-1998. The world tilted beneath me. My breath came in ragged gasps as the truth crashed down. My wife, my first wife, had been dead for nearly 30 years. I don't remember how I made it back home that night. My body moved, but my mind was splintered, caught between disbelief and a bone-deep dread that refused to let go. Every time I blinked, I saw that photograph burned into the back of my eyelids. Claire's face younger, but undeniably hers, framed by the words "in loving memory." I wanted so badly to convince myself it was a mistake, some cruel coincidence, a woman who just happened to look like her. But deep down, something inside me already knew. The late-night meetings, her aversion to daylight, the way her skin always felt cold, the way she seemed to appear and vanish as if tethered to shadows. I had married a ghost. And now I had no idea what that meant for me, for us. When I saw her the next evening, my throat felt like it was closing. She was waiting for me on the corner near the river, the way she always did, her hands folded delicately in front of her, her silver ring catching the faint light. She looked exactly the same as always, beautiful, serene, almost painfully human. I wanted to run. God help me, I wanted to run and never look back. But instead, I walked up to her, my hands trembling so badly I had to shove them in my pockets to hide it. She smiled, reaching for me like nothing was wrong. And that's when I blurted it out, the words tumbling out of me like shards of glass. I saw your grave. For the first time since I'd known her, her face changed. Not into shock, not into denial, but into something like resignation. Her smile faltered, her shoulders sagged, and she looked away down at the water, glinting black beneath the streetlights. For a long moment, she said nothing. I almost wished she would laugh, tell me I was mistaken, call me crazy. But when she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, trembling like a violin string. I told you some things are better left alone. My knees went weak. I grabbed her arm without thinking, desperate, frantic. What are you? What have you done to me? The words sounded pathetic, even as I shouted them. She turned back to me slowly, her eyes glistening with something I couldn't name. Grief, guilt, or maybe hunger. I am what you think I am, she whispered. I died a long time ago, but I couldn't move on. Not completely. Not until... Her voice cracked. Not until you. It felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of what she was saying. I stumbled back, shaking my head violently, but she followed me, her steps light, almost soundless on the pavement. You bound yourself to me, she said, her voice growing steadier. That night when you said the vows, you're mine now, forever. The word forever rang in my ears like a funeral bell. I stared at the ring on my finger, suddenly terrified of the cold silver band I had worn so casually for weeks. It felt heavy, suffocating. I tried to yank it off, but no matter how hard I pulled, it wouldn't budge. My skin burned beneath it, as if the metal had fused with my flesh. Panic clawed at me, rising in my chest like fire. Please, I gasped. Please let me go. Her expression softened, then almost tender. She reached out and cupped my face, her palm ice cold against my burning skin. I love you, she said simply. I chose you. You're the one who saw me, who loved me when no one else could. Don't take that away from me. Don't abandon me. For a moment, just a split second, I almost believed her. My heart ached at the raw desperation in her voice, the loneliness etched into her every word. But then I remembered the photograph, the chanting the decades carved into stone. And I realized what loving her really meant. Giving myself to something that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. I pushed her away harder than I meant to. She stumbled back, her form flickering under the streetlight like a broken film reel. My stomach twisted as I saw her face waver, her skin paling into something translucent, her eyes glowing faintly with that same unnatural light I had noticed in the chapel. She wasn't just dead. She was something else, something bound to darkness and ritual, and now I was bound to her. I ran that night. I didn't look back to see if she followed me. My lungs burned, my vision blurred, but I ran until I collapsed in my apartment, slamming the door shut behind me and sinking to the floor like a man who had just outrun his own execution. But even there in the fragile safety of my home, I wasn't free. I could feel her presence like a shadow in the corners, like cold fingers brushing against my neck. When I closed my eyes, I heard her whispering my name, soft and pleading. When I looked in the mirror, I swore I saw her reflection standing behind me, smiling faintly as though she had never left. That was when I finally understood the true horror. Leaving her wasn't possible. Not after those vows. Not after the ring. Not after I had let her bind me. I hadn't just married a ghost. I had shackled my soul to her, and she wasn't about to let go. Not in this life. Not in the next. After that night, my life split into two versions. There was the version everyone else saw, me going to work, nodding along to conversations, pretending to laugh at my friends' jokes. And then there was the version only I knew, the one that existed in the quiet hours when the world went still. The whispers, the cold spots in my apartment, the lingering scent of roses, even though I hadn't bought flowers in months. Claire was with me everywhere, even when she wasn't visible. And sometimes she was visible. I'd wake in the middle of the night to find her sitting at the edge of my bed, her pale hand resting lightly on my leg, her eyes glistening with something between love and hunger. Every time I blinked, she flickered. Solid 1 second translucent, the next her outline glowing faintly like mist catching moonlight. I stopped sleeping after that. Sleep meant seeing her. Sleep meant letting her closer. I tried everything to break free. I saw priests, psychics, even a self-proclaimed exorcist I found online. None of it worked. The priest couldn't even step into my apartment. He doubled over at the threshold, muttering prayers under his breath and fleeing with sweat pouring down his forehead. The psychic refused to touch the ring, whispering that it carried death energy that she didn't dare disturb. The exorcist was worse. He tried chanting and burning incense, but by the end of it, he was curled in a corner, crying like a child, begging me to pay him and let him leave. That was the moment I realized no one could save me. Whatever Claire had done in that chapel, whatever vows I had repeated without thinking, had bound me in a way that couldn't be undone by ordinary hands. I stopped seeing friends altogether. I couldn't risk it. Once a coworker walked me home after drinks, and Claire showed up in the middle of the street, her eyes blazing. My coworker never saw her. He just froze pale and trembling, insisting he felt like he'd walked through ice water. He quit a week later, sent me a vague text about bad vibes before blocking my number. That's when I knew Claire wasn't just haunting me. She was warning others away, keeping me to herself, exactly like she'd always wanted. The strangest part? A piece of me still loved her. Or maybe loved the memory of her, the woman she had pretended to be in those first weeks when every night felt like an adventure and every kiss felt like salvation. There were nights when she would crawl into bed beside me, her touch cold but gentle, whispering promises about eternity, about never being alone again. And I'd lie there, torn between terror and longing, wondering if maybe this was what I had really been searching for all along. Someone who would never leave me, not even in death. That thought terrified me more than anything else. Because what if some part of me didn't want to be free? The final straw came one stormy night, nearly a year after the night in the chapel. I was sitting in the dark, drinking myself numb when the power went out. Lightning flashed through the windows, and in that brief white glare, I saw her standing in the corner of the room. Not flickering, not fading. Solid like she was alive again. She was wearing the same dress from our wedding, her silver ring gleaming, her face serene. "It's time," she whispered. My throat closed. Time for what? I croaked. Her smile widened, and I realized then how wrong I'd been from the start. This was never about love. This was about possession, about eternity, about her dragging me down into whatever shadowy half-existence she had been trapped in since 1998. The candles I'd left on the counter flared suddenly, their flames stretching unnaturally high, and the room filled with the stench of burning roses. The ring on my finger seared my skin, glowing red hot. I screamed, clawing at it, but it still wouldn't come off. Claire stepped closer, her hands outstretched, her eyes now nothing but black voids. "You are mine," she said, her voice layered with echoes that rattled the walls. "Forever begins tonight." I don't remember much after that. Just pain, searing, all-consuming pain, and the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears until it stopped. When I woke, it wasn't morning. It wasn't even day. It was silence. Empty, infinite silence. I was lying in my bed, but something was wrong. The world looked dimmer, thinner, like the edges of everything had been erased. And then I saw her lying beside me, smiling tenderly, her hand entwined with mine. The ring no longer burned. It fit perfectly, as if it had always belonged there. That's when I understood. I hadn't escaped her. I never could. I was hers now. Not in the way I thought when I first fell in love, but in the most literal, horrifying sense. Somewhere out there, my body might still be breathing, going through the motions. But my soul? My soul belongs to Claire. My first wife. My only wife. The ghost who made me hers until the end of time. And now, as I type this, I don't even know if these words are reaching you the way I think they are, or if they're just echoing in the void where I now exist. Maybe you'll read this as just another creepy story online, nothing more. Or maybe, and this thought chills me most of all, maybe it's Claire who wanted me to share it, who wanted her story told so she could find someone else to bind. If you're watching this, all I can say is, be careful who you fall in love with. Be careful whose hand you take, whose ring you wear, whose vows you speak in the dark. Because sometimes, love isn't salvation. Sometimes, it's the trap that follows you even after death.